They were dying, and the galaxy did nothing. Ambassador stood in the great hall of the Galactic Concord, his thin blue body trembling as he watched the holographic display. His floated in the center of the room. Around it, like a swarm of hungry insects, 400 warships waited. The countdown timer showed 68 hours remaining. After that, the bombardment would begin. After that, his people would burn. "Please," said, his voice barely above a whisper, "someone must help us." The council chamber was full of representatives from dozens of species. They had traveled from across the galaxy to sit in these seats, to make decisions that shaped the future of civilization. Now they sat in silence, avoiding desperate eyes. The delegate spoke first. His species was known for their logic and their cowardice in equal measure. "Our fleet is engaged in the outer rim. We cannot spare ships." "The collective regrets that our military is defensive only," said another voice. "We cannot project force beyond our borders." One by one they offered excuses. Treaties prevented them. Resources were limited. The risk was too great. Listened to each refusal, and with each one, hope died a little more inside him. They had never been warriors. Their world was gentle. Low gravity, warm seas, soft winds. They had evolved to create art and music, to build beautiful cities that floated on clouds. They had never needed weapons because they had never made enemies, until they came. They were conquerors. They moved through the galaxy like a plague, consuming worlds and enslaving populations. They had chosen for its resources and its strategic location. They had tried to negotiate. They had offered trade, tribute, anything they wanted. They wanted everything. "There must be something," begged. "We are members of this Concord. We pay our dues. We follow the laws. Does that mean nothing?" Elder, the oldest in the diplomatic corps, placed a gentle hand on shoulder. Her skin was wrinkled and her glow had faded with age, but her mind remained sharp. She had seen much in her 300 years of life. She had seen species rise and fall. She had seen wars end and begin. And she had seen, 5 years ago, the arrival of the— "There is one option," said quietly, "though I hesitate to speak it." The chamber fell completely silent. Every eye turned to the old diplomat. "We could ask the humans." The reaction was immediate: gasps of horror, whispers of fear. The delegate actually stood up and backed away from the table, as if the very mention of humans might summon them. Understood their fear. He shared it. Humans came from Earth, a world so hostile that most species could not survive there for more than a few minutes. High gravity that crushed bones, extreme temperatures that froze or burned, predators everywhere, diseases that mutated faster than medicine could cure. And yet humans had not only survived on this nightmare world, they had conquered it. They had spread across their solar system and then reached out to the stars. When humanity joined the Galactic Concord, the other species had watched them with terror. Humans were too strong, too fast, too aggressive. They ate the flesh of other creatures. They pumped poison through their blood for recreation. They threw themselves from heights for fun. They were, by every measure the galaxy used, monsters. Though the delegate said, his voice high with panic, "You would invite those savages to our space. They would be worse than the—" "Would they?" asked calmly. "The humans have been members of this Concord for 5 years. In that time, have they attacked anyone? Have they conquered any world? Have they broken any law?" Silence. The truth was uncomfortable. Humans had been perfect members of the Concord. They traded fairly. They honored agreements. They even provided aid to species affected by natural disasters. But still, the fear remained. Because everyone knew what humans were capable of. Everyone knew what lurked beneath their friendly smiles. "We have no other choice," said slowly. He looked at the holographic display of his world surrounded by enemies. He thought of his family on the surface, waiting for death. "Send the message." Nodded. She moved to the communication terminal and began typing. The message was simple. There was no time for formal diplomatic language. "We need help, any help, please." She transmitted it to Earth and then stepped back. The council watched the empty screen, not knowing what to expect. Perhaps the humans would ignore them. Perhaps they would demand payment. Perhaps they would come to conquer themselves. The response came in 6 hours. Was sleeping when his assistant woke him. He rushed to the communications center, his heart's pounding. On the screen was a human face. Male, middle-aged, with tired eyes and hair at his temples. He wore a dark uniform covered in medals and insignia that did not recognize. "This is Admiral of the Terran United Fleet," the human said. His voice was calm, almost gentle. "We received your transmission. We are responding." The translator struggled with the next part of the message. The human language was strange, full of hard sounds and unusual rhythms, but the meaning came through clearly enough. "Fleet en route. Hold the line, we're coming." The transmission ended, stood frozen, unsure whether to feel relief or greater terror. He had asked them for help, and now they were coming. Across the galaxy, in the darkness between stars, 120 warships changed course. Their engines burned hot, their crews prepared for battle, and on the bridge of the flagship, Admiral looked at the tactical display showing the siege of. "All ships," he said quietly, "maximum speed, we have people to save." The fleet jumped to hyperspace and the stars blurred into lines of light. Behind them, Earth grew small and disappeared. Ahead of them, war waited, and they who had never known violence were about to learn what happened when went to war. Overlord had conquered 12 worlds. He had crushed rebellions, broken armies, and burned cities that refused to surrender. In all his years of war, he had never known fear. He sat on his command throne aboard the flagship Devourer, watching his fleet circle the helpless planet below, and felt only satisfaction. There were soft creatures. They glowed like insects and broke like glass. When the bombardment began, they would die by the millions. Those who survived would serve the Dominion until their bodies gave out. It was the natural order of things. The strong consumed the weak. "Overlord," his sensor officer called out. "We detect hyperspace signatures at the edge of the system." Clicked his mandibles in annoyance. "How many ships?" 120, Overlord. Laughed. The sound was harsh and grinding like stones scraping together. "The Conquered finally sends help. 100 ships against 400, he gestured with one clawed limb. "Let them come. We will add their wreckage to our collection." The ships dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation. They were smaller than vessels, covered in thick armor plating and bristling with weapons. Their hulls were painted dark and black, like shadows given form. On each ship, a simple symbol, a blue planet with a single moon. Studied the newcomers on his display. He had heard stories about humans, of course. Every species in the galaxy had heard stories, creatures from a death world, predators who had somehow developed civilization, dangerous animals wearing clothes and pretending to be people. But they were still just animals, and animals could be killed. "This is Admiral of the Terran United Fleet," a voice said over the communication channel. The translation was clear and calm. "You have 12 hours to withdraw from space. This is your only warning." Felt his crew tense around him. They were afraid. They had heard the same stories he had, but fear was weakness, and weakness could not be tolerated. "Open a channel," commanded. He stood from his throne, letting his full height show on the visual display. He was massive even by standards, his carapace enhanced with genetic modifications, his claws capable of tearing through metal. "Human Admiral, I am Overlord of the Dominion. Your warning means nothing to me. Leave now, or your fleet will become scattered atoms in the void." There was a pause, then the human spoke again. 12 hours, Overlord, starting now." The channel closed, stared at the screen for a moment, then burst into grinding laughter. His officers joined in, though their laughs were nervous. "Send 50 ships to intercept them," ordered. "Destroy them all. Let the rest of the galaxy see what happens to those who challenge the Dominion." The 50 warships broke formation and accelerated toward the human fleet. They were the ships in the Dominion, armed with plasma cannons and missile batteries that could crack planets. Each one had fought in a dozen battles. Their crews were veterans. On the bridge of the Indomitable, Captain watched them approach. She was young for a ship commander, but she had earned her position through skill and courage. Her crew trusted her completely. "They're sending 50 ships," her tactical officer reported. Lieutenant was even younger than her captain, barely 25 years old, but her mind worked faster than the ship's computers. Standard attack formation. They expect us to run. Then they don't know us very well, said. She pressed the fleet communication button. All ships, this is indomitable, weapons free, show them what we're made of. The human fleet did not retreat. They did not scatter. They accelerated directly toward the interceptors, their weapons charging, their shields activating, and then they opened fire. They had never seen weapons like this. Human-fired projectiles at a fraction of the speed of light, punching through armor like paper. Human missiles used advanced tracking systems that could not be fooled by countermeasures. Human point defense networks filled the space around their ships with deadly fire, destroying incoming attacks before they could connect. The battle lasted 17 minutes. When it ended, 50 warships were destroyed. Broken hulls drifted through space, leaking atmosphere and bodies. The human fleet had lost 2 ships. 2. Ambassador watched the battle from the Planetary Defense Center. The around him were silent, their bioluminescent bodies dimmed with shock. They had never seen violence like this. They had never imagined it was possible. What are they? Someone whispered. Could not answer. He understood now why the galaxy feared humans. It was not because they were strong, though they were. It was not because they were aggressive, though they were. It was because when humans decided to fight, they fought to win. There was no hesitation, no mercy, no doubt. On the Devourer, Overlord watched the wreckage of his interceptors drift past his. For the first time in his long career, he felt something cold settle in his chest. Not fear. He would not call it fear, but something close. All ships, he commanded, his voice harder than before. Attack formation, destroy the human fleet, all of them. 350 warships began to move. Their engines flared, their weapons charged. They outnumbered the humans almost 3 to 1. Surely that would be enough. On the Indomitable, Captain smiled grimly as she watched the enemy fleet advance. Admiral, she said into her communicator, they're coming, all of them. Admiral's voice came back calm and steady. Good. Then we only have to fight one battle. All ships prepare for engagement. Today we remind the galaxy why they call us. The 2 fleets closed the distance between them. Weapons fire lit up the void, and above the peaceful world of the real battle began. Space burned. Plasma bolts crossed paths with rounds. Missiles exploded against shields. Ships died in flashes of light that lasted only seconds. The battle around was the largest the sector had seen in 100 years, and it was only getting started. Admiral stood at the center of his bridge, watching the tactical display with calm eyes. Around him, officers shouted reports and coordinates. Alarms blared. The deck shook as enemy fire struck the flagship's shields. Through it all, remained still. They are trying to surround us, his tactical officer reported. They want to use their numbers to trap us. Then we don't let them, said. Signal the fleet, we're going through them, not around. The human ships changed formation. Instead of spreading out to meet the enemy on a wide front, they grouped together into a tight wedge. It was a dangerous move. If they failed, they would be trapped and destroyed. But humans had not survived their death world by playing it safe. The wedge punched into the formation like a knife. Human ships fired in all directions, their weapons never stopping, their shields flickering but holding. They tried to respond, but they were not prepared for this kind of fighting. They expected their enemies to be cautious. They expected their enemies to fear death. Humans did not fear death. They had made peace with it long ago. On the Indomitable, Captain gripped her command chair as the ship shook again. A cruiser had gotten close enough to hammer them with plasma fire. She could see it through a massive vessel covered in spines and weapons. Target their engines, she ordered. Then their weapons, leave their life support alone. Captain, Lieutenant looked confused. Why spare them? Because dead enemies don't surrender. Broken enemies do. Eyes were hard, and I want them to tell stories about what happened here today. The Indomitable fired. The cruiser's engines exploded. Its weapons went silent. It drifted away, crippled but alive, its crew watching helplessly as the battle raged around them. While the fleet fought, something else was happening, something they did not expect. Deep in the cargo bay of the cruiser Horizon, Sergeant checked his rifle one more time. Around him, 20 Marines prepared for combat. They wore heavy armor designed for hostile environments. Their weapons were built for close-quarters fighting. They were the sharp edge of humanity's sword. "Listen up," said. His voice was quiet but carried through the bay. "Our target is the enemy flagship, the Devourer. We board, we find the command bridge, we kill the Overlord. Questions?" Corporal Menu raised his hand. He was the youngest member of the team, barely 20 years old, with a face that still looked like a boy's. "Sergeant, have humans ever boarded a ship before?" "No," admitted. "We'll be the first." "What if we fail?" Looked at the young corporal. He saw the fear in Menu's eyes, buried beneath determination. Every soldier felt that fear before battle. The difference between a good soldier and a dead one was what you did with it. "Then we die well," said simply. "But we're not going to fail. We're going to cut off the head of the snake, and when we do, this battle ends." The boarding craft launched from the Horizon's bay. It was small and fast, designed to slip through defenses and attach to enemy hulls. Around it, the battle provided cover. They were too busy fighting the human fleet to notice one tiny craft approaching their flagship. At the same time, Commander watched her displays with growing concern. The Horizon was taking heavy fire. Her ship was not as fast or as heavily armed as the Indomitable, but she had positioned herself between the and the civilian transports evacuating from the surface. "Commander, we're losing shields," her first officer reported. "We can't take much more of this." Looked at the transports behind her. 12 ships, each carrying thousands of terrified. If she moved, they would die. If she stayed, she would die. It was not a difficult choice. "All power to forward shields," she ordered, "and prepare the crew to abandon ship." "Commander." "I'm staying," said calmly. "Someone needs to keep shooting. Someone needs to buy those transports time to escape." She looked at her first officer with gentle eyes. "Get the crew to the escape pods. That's an order." The Horizon shuddered as another volley struck her hull. Alarms screamed. Fires broke out on 3 decks. One by one, the escape pods launched, carrying crew to safety. She watched them go on her display, counting each one, making sure everyone made it. Then she turned back to her weapons console. The destroyer in front of her had been hammering the civilian transports. Its captain thought the Horizon was finished. Its captain was wrong. Fired everything she had left, missiles, even the emergency thrusters, aimed directly at the destroyer's bridge. The enemy ship tried to evade, but it was too close. The Horizon's final attack tore through its hull. The destroyer exploded. 2 more behind it took damage from the debris. The civilian transports escaped. Commander closed her eyes as fire consumed her bridge. She thought of her crew, safe in their escape pods. She thought of the she had saved. She thought of her parents back on Earth, who had always told her she was meant for something important. "I hope this counts," she whispered. The Horizon broke apart, and across the fleet, every human ship lowered their flags for one moment of silence before returning to the battle. On the Devourer, Sergeant's boarding craft attached to the hull. The Marines cut through the metal with plasma torches. They stepped into the enemy ship, their weapons raised, their hearts pounding. They were waiting for them, but so were the humans. And humans had been fighting in hostile environments since before they learned to make fire. The corridors of the Devourer were dark and hot. The air was thin, filled with chemicals that burned human lungs. The gravity was lighter than Earth, which should have made moving easier, but they had designed their ship to confuse invaders. Corridors twisted at strange angles. Doorways appeared where walls should be. The darkness moved. Sergeant pressed forward anyway. His team had started with 20 Marines. Now there were 8. They had fought them at every turn, and they were not easy enemies. They were fast despite their size. Their claws could punch through standard armor. They felt no pain and showed no fear. But humans were worse. Moved through the darkness like a ghost. His rifle spoke in short, controlled bursts. Each shot found its target. The who came at him died before they understood what was happening. He had been training for combat since he was 18 years old. He had fought in 3 wars before this one. He was not afraid of insects, no matter how large they grew. Corporal Minu stayed close behind him. The young soldier was bleeding from a wound on his arm, but he refused to slow down. His eyes were wide with fear and something else. Determination, purpose, the same fire that burned in every human who had ever faced impossible odds. "Command bridge is ahead," said, checking his scanner. 200 meters, heavy resistance expected. "How heavy?" Minu asked. "The Overlord's personal guard, elite warriors, maybe 30 of them." Minu swallowed hard, 8 against 30. "I've had worse odds," looked at his team. 8 Marines wounded and tired standing in the heart of an enemy ship. They should have been afraid. They should have wanted to retreat. Instead, they checked their weapons and nodded. "For Commander," one of them said quietly. "For Commander," the others repeated. They advanced. The final corridor leading to the bridge was a killing ground. They had set up barricades and positioned their best warriors behind them. When the humans appeared, plasma fire filled the air. 2 Marines fell in the first seconds. Did not hesitate. He threw a grenade, then another, then charged through the smoke and fire. His rifle ran empty, so he drew his pistol. When that ran empty, he pulled his combat knife. The elite were not prepared for this. They had fought many species across the galaxy. They had never fought humans at close range. They did not understand that humans had evolved as persistent predators, that their bodies could take damage that would kill other species, that their minds could push through pain and exhaustion and fear. Killed 6 with his knife before they pulled back. When the smoke cleared, 5 Marines remained. Minu was one of them, though his armor was cracked and his face was pale. They stood before the doors to the command bridge. "Breaching charge," ordered. They blew the doors open and stepped inside. Overlord was waiting for them. He was massive, nearly 3 meters tall, his carapace covered in ceremonial armor that had been passed down through generations of conquerors. His claws were the size of swords. His eyes, all 6 of them, burned with hatred. "Humans," he said, his voice grinding like broken machinery. "You dare enter my bridge, you dare challenge me." "You threatened innocent people," said calmly. "We came to stop you." Laughed. The sound filled the bridge, echoing off the metal walls. "You stop me. I have conquered 12 worlds. I have crushed armies. You are just insects pretending to be warriors. Then killing us should be easy." Charged. The first 2 Marines who tried to stop him died instantly. His claws moved too fast to follow, tearing through armor and flesh like they were nothing. The 3rd Marine managed to fire his rifle, but the bullets bounced off his enhanced carapace, grabbed him and threw him across the bridge. And Minu faced the Overlord alone. "Run," told Minu. "Get to the communication system, broadcast everything. Let the fleet know what happened here." "Sergeant." "That's an order, Corporal." Minu hesitated for 1 second. Then he ran toward the communication console on the far side of the bridge. Tried to intercept him, stepped into his path. The fight was brutal, was stronger, faster, bigger. His claws opened wounds on his chest and arms. His tail struck like a whip, cracking ribs. Any other species would have fallen. Any other soldier would have died. Kept fighting. He ducked under a claw strike and drove his knife into the joint of his leg. The Overlord roared in pain, twisted the blade, then pulled it free and stabbed again. And again. Each strike found a gap in the armor, a weakness in the carapace. Grabbed by the throat and lifted him off the ground. The sergeant's feet dangled in the air. His vision began to darken. "You cannot win," hissed. "You are nothing." Behind the Overlord, Corporal Minu raised his rifle. "Hey, bug." Turned his head. Minu fired. The shot hit his eye, one of the few unarmored parts of his body. The Overlord screamed and dropped, clutching his face. Hit the ground, gasped for air, and moved. He dove forward, his knife leading, and found the weak point Commander had identified in the anatomy reports. The gap between the chest plates, where the internal organs were closest to the surface. The knife went into the hilt. Overlord staggered. He looked down at the human weapon buried in his chest. He looked at the human who had put it there. Confusion filled his remaining eyes. "How," he whispered. "We're said, this is what we do." Fell, the deck shook with the impact of his body. The overlord of 12 worlds, the conqueror who had never known defeat, died on the bridge of his own ship, killed by a creature half his size from a world he had dismissed as insignificant. Turned to Minu. The young corporal was slumped against the communication console, blood pooling beneath him. His tail had struck him while he was aiming. The wound was fatal. "Did I do good, Sergeant?" Minu asked. His voice was weak. Knelt beside him. "You did perfect, son. You saved us all." Minu smiled, his eyes closed. Stayed with him until the end. Then he stood, walked to the communication console, and opened a channel to the fleet. "This is Sergeant of the Terran Marines. Your overlord is dead. Surrender now or join him." He transmitted an image of Spotty. Across the battlefield, ships stopped firing. Some fled. Others drifted, their crews paralyzed by the sight of their invincible leader lying dead at human feet. The siege was over. But the cost had been high, and bleeding and exhausted, could only think of the young soldier who had given everything so that others might live. 3 months had passed since the Battle of. The galaxy was different now. The Dominion had retreated to their home systems, their fleet broken, their reputation destroyed. Other aggressive species looked at the humans with new eyes and decided that diplomacy was preferable to war. Trade routes that had been closed for years reopened. Planets that had lived in fear began to breathe again. They were rebuilding. Their cities had survived the siege, but their innocence had not. They understood now that the universe was a dangerous place, and that survival required more than art and music. It required friends willing to fight. Ambassador stood on a hillside overlooking the capital city. Behind him, a monument rose toward the sky. It was made of crystal and light, designed in the style but shaped to honor those who had died saving their world. 31 human ships, 4,217 human lives. Admiral stood beside him, wearing his dress uniform for the first time since the battle. His face was tired but calm. He had spent the past 3 months writing letters to the families of the dead, attending funerals, answering questions from journalists and politicians. He had not slept well in weeks. "It is beautiful," said, looking at the monument. "It is not enough," replied. His voice was soft with guilt. Nothing could ever be enough. "You're right, it isn't," turned to face the ambassador. "But it matters that you built it. It matters that you remember." The ceremony began. Thousands have gathered on the hillside, their bioluminescent bodies glowing softly in the evening light. Representatives from a dozen species stood among them. Even the had sent a delegation, though they kept their distance from the human officers. Elder walked to the podium. She was older now, more tired, but her voice carried across the crowd with perfect clarity. 3 months ago," she said, "we sent a message into the darkness. We asked for help and we did not know if anyone would answer. We called them, we were afraid of them. We thought they were monsters." She paused, looking out at the crowd. "We were wrong. They came when no one else would. They fought when no one else could. They died so that we might live. They are not monsters. They are not savages. They are the bravest, most selfless people we have ever known." Turned to face Admiral. "We called them, but today we give them a new name. Today we call them." The crowd erupted in applause. They pressed their hands together, creating waves of light that rippled across the hillside. Admiral bowed his head, accepting the honor with the same quiet dignity that had carried him through the battle. Later, after the ceremony, Captain found Sergeant standing alone at the base of the monument. His wounds had healed, but the scars remained. He would carry them for the rest of his life. "You should be up there with the others," said. "You're a hero." "I'm just a soldier." Did not look away from the monument. His eyes were fixed on one name carved into the crystal, Corporal Minu. "The heroes are the ones who didn't come home." Stood beside him in silence. She understood. Every soldier understood. "I'm being given a new ship," she said finally. "They're calling it the Minu. I'd like you to be part of the crew." Turned to look at her. For the first time in months, something like a smile crossed his face. "I'd like that." 2 weeks later stood on a doorstep in Earth. The house was small and neat, surrounded by a garden of flowers. An older couple answered the door. Their faces were kind but marked by grief. "Mr. and Mrs. Park," said, "I served with your son." They invited him inside. He sat in their living room, surrounded by photographs of Minyu growing up, the boy who had become a soldier, the soldier who had become a hero. Told them everything, how their son had fought bravely, how he had saved life, how he had died with courage and without regret. When he finished, Mrs. Park was crying. Her husband held her hand tightly. "Thank you," Mr. Park said. His voice was rough with emotion. "Thank you for telling us." Reached into his pocket and pulled out a set of dog tags. He had carried them since that day on the Devourer's bridge. "These belong to you now," he said, placing them in Mrs. Park's hands. He left them with their grief and their pride, and he did not look back. On the space station Unity, the Galactic Concord convened a historic session. Representatives from every member species filled the Great Hall. At the center of the chamber, a formal proposal was being debated. They had proposed a new defense alliance with Earth. Other species, ones who had been too afraid to help during the siege, were now eager to join. They had seen what humans could do. They had seen what humans would do for their friends. The vote was unanimous. The alliance passed. In the celebrations that followed, Ambassador found Admiral sitting alone in a quiet corner. "You don't seem happy," observed. "I'm not unhappy," said. "I'm just thinking about the future, about what this means." "What does it mean?" Looked at the Ambassador with tired eyes. "It means we're the galaxy's protectors now. It means the next time someone calls for help, they'll call us, and we'll answer, every time." "Is that a burden?" "Yes," smiled slightly, "but it's the right kind of burden." 3 months after the battle, Captain stood on the bridge of her new ship. The Minyu was beautiful, the most advanced vessel in the Terran fleet. Her crew moved around her with practiced efficiency. Through the stars stretched out in every direction. "All stations report ready," Lieutenant announced from her tactical console. Nodded, she pressed the communication button and addressed her crew. "We're not here to conquer. We're not here to dominate. We're here so that when someone screams for help into the void, there's someone screaming back, 'We're coming.'" She looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, someone was afraid, someone was in danger, someone needed help. "Set course for the patrol route," she ordered. "Let's go to work." The Minyu's engines flared. The ship moved forward into the darkness. And somewhere on, a young child stood in her garden, watching the stars. Her mother came to stand beside her. "What are you looking for?" her mother asked. "The humans," the child said. "Are they still out there?" Her mother smiled. "They're always out there, watching, protecting, ready to come if anyone needs them." "Why?" "Because that's who they are." The child thought about this for a moment. Then she smiled too. Above them, the stars shone bright. And in the darkness between worlds, humanity watched over a galaxy that was finally learning what it meant to have friends. They had become. And they were just getting started.